I was kidnapped at the same time as his first love, Beverly. Both Andre and my son chose to save Beverly first. With a faint hint of disdain, my son said in his young, innocent voice. Dad said that since Mom has a system, she won't die. The next second, the kidnappers threw me into the sea. And that night, the headline screamed, "The hidden wife of President Fu falls into the sea and dies." But Andre and I were never married. He once said he'd never marry me. 3 months later, I ran into him and his son by accident while holding my daughter's hand. My daughter let out a soft, "Huh? Mommy, why is that little boy looking at you and crying?" I kept my gaze steady and replied. I don't know. I don't recognize him. When Beverly and I were left dangling over a cliff, my system was calmly comforting me. Don't worry, host. As long as there's one person in this world who would choose you in a moment of danger, I'll stay as your system and protect you. That was the condition of our bond. The cold wind stung my face as I replied expressionlessly. Andre will always choose his first love, Beverly. The system seemed so relaxed, I could almost imagine it sipping afternoon tea like a noblewoman. I know, but your son's here, too. They're almost here. Would your son abandon you for someone else? As long as he chooses to save you, even if you're thrown into the sea, I'll make sure you get back to shore safely. I stayed silent, yet deep down, I had a vague feeling that Oswin wouldn't choose me either. A month ago, the news was buzzing with reports, President Andre and Beverly, the socialite, rumored to be engaged soon. That night, Andre returned from the office. Oswin rushed up to him, his little hands pushing at him forcefully. I don't want you to be my dad anymore. This is my and Mommy's house, you're not allowed in. Andre frowned slightly. What are you fussing about now? Oswin's tears kept falling, but he stubbornly glared at Andre. I heard Nanny say that you're going to marry another lady and have children with her. You don't want me and Mommy anymore. I came out from the kitchen just in time to witness this. Hurrying over, I wrapped my arms around my upset, bristling little boy, comforting him. Oswin clung to my neck, crying. Mommy, we don't need Daddy either. His soft little hand clutched me tightly, his sobs coming in broken bursts. Oswin will kick him out. Oswin won't let him bully Mommy. Andre narrowed his eyes, staring at me intensely, a mocking smile tugging at his lips. Oswin, he said, why don't you ask your good Mommy what she did? I met his gaze, patting Oswin's back calmly. I already explained that. Andre pulled at his tie and lowered his gaze as he unfastened his watch. Without looking up, he added coolly. Maybe ask if your son believes you. Oswin let go of me, tears still clinging to his lashes. He turned and shouted, anyway, Mommy wouldn't do anything bad. Andre tossed his watch onto the sofa. Is that so? Oswin barely reached above Andre's knee, but Andre wouldn't bend down even to speak to his own son. Standing straight, he gazed down at him. What about almost killing someone, is that bad? Oswin was left speechless, frozen. A few days earlier, Andre had witnessed me driving straight into Beverly. Beverly! Andre ran across the street, frantic, and scooped Beverly's blood-soaked body into his arms. His shirt was stained red, but it was nothing compared to the scarlet rage in his eyes. He glanced at me, stunned and speechless behind the wheel, as if I were already dead to him. The system sighed. Sorry, hitting Beverly was a part of your storyline as the villainess. Since you refused to do it, I had to control your body to finish the plot. That night, back at home, I had a massive fight with the system. I was so enraged, I didn't even notice Andre standing by the door, listening to everything. He learned that I'd approached him as part of a task. And he discovered that, with the system's protection, no matter how severe my injuries, I couldn't die. After Andre explained everything slowly to Oswin, he looked down at him with a faint smile. And you think she loves you? If you weren't a boy, do you think she'd still want you? I tried to take Oswin back to our room, but Andre grabbed my wrist firmly, pulling me in front of him, his gaze playful. What are you hiding? Guilty conscience? Unable to pull free, all I could do was give a feeble explanation. I've told you from the start, I don't value boys over girls. Oswin tilted his head, looking between Andre and me. Finally, he came over, tugging on my sleeve. Mommy, what's Daddy talking about? Oswin doesn't understand. The instinctive closeness of my child calmed my frayed nerves a bit. I thought he believed me. I knelt down to explain to him, but Andre cut in. When she was pregnant with you, she got a gender test. Oswin stared at me, lips pressed tight, his chubby cheeks puffing up. He seemed not to fully grasp Andre's words. I had a phased task, which required earning Andre's mother's approval. The system told me that completing this task would free me from being forced into the plot and allow me to progress on my own terms. But Andre's mother looked down on my background. With a casual tone, holding her coffee, she had said, "If you can bear a son, I'll let you join the family." This was her way of showing acceptance. When I became pregnant with Oswin, I couldn't wait to pull some strings to get a gender test done. The storyline was driving me insane. As the villainess, I had been forced into doing many things I never wanted to do. Andre's mother was pleased with the result, and I was finally allowed to end that phase of my task. Andre later found the test result, but he didn't know about the task. He thought I cared only about bearing a son to climb into high society. With a cold laugh, he tossed the paper at my face, his eyes filled with disgust and disappointment. How could I have gotten involved with such a disgusting woman? That's why he refused to marry me, nor would he let me go. Instead, he kept me tied to him while flirting endlessly with Beverly. Oswin listened with a mixed look of understanding. He lifted his small, soft hand to grab my finger. "Mommy, if Oswin wasn't a boy, would Mommy still want Oswin?" He ignored Andre completely, looking up at me with hope. I knew that if I denied Andre's words, everything would be fine. Oswin trusted me unconditionally. But in the end, I answered with silence. At that time, I was on the edge of breaking, desperate to escape the control over my fate. If the test had shown a girl, I honestly couldn't guarantee I wouldn't have abandoned him. In the heavy, tense silence, the color drained from Oswin's face as he released my hand, stunned. Panicked, I grabbed his hand again. "But Mommy loves you very much now. Oswin can feel that, can't you?" Oswin shook his head repeatedly, backing away, his eyes welling up with tears. I reached out, trying to hold him. "Oswin." But when he couldn't push me away, he bit down hard on my wrist. As soon as I let go, he ran back to his room without a backward glance. I knelt on the carpet, quietly staring at the faintly bleeding bite mark. Andre sat on the sofa, coldly watching, the mockery in his eyes revealing that he had understood everything from the start. Suddenly, I couldn't take it anymore. I propped myself up on the sofa, stood, and asked him, "So, you're going to marry Beverly, aren't you?" Andre looked up slightly. "What does that have to do with you?" I felt nothing but numbness toward his cruel words now. "To make room for you and Beverly. I'm taking Oswin and leaving." He remained indifferent. "Don't even think about it." Andre stood, walking up to me, wrapping an arm around my waist. He held me close, but his gaze was filled with contempt. "Even if I marry Beverly, she'll live in a new home. You think I'd let her stay in a place where you've lived? Even I think it's filthy for her. And as for you..." He abruptly let go of me, pulling out a wet wipe to clean his hands as if I'd contaminated him. He was trying to humiliate me. "If you're willing to let go of Oswin, you can leave anytime." I broke down. Through my tears, I questioned him, "Why, Andre? I haven't wronged you. I really did love you." The only answer I got was the cold sound of the bedroom door closing. I knew Oswin was upset about this whole situation. So, I tried every way I could to cheer him up and apologize to him. But he kept avoiding me, time after time. Until one day, the nanny took a 2-hour leave. I went to pick him up from school myself. I arrived 20 minutes early, so preschool hadn't dismissed yet. And that's when I saw my son, hand in hand with Andre and Beverly, participating in a parent-child activity at school. The scene was so warm, so peaceful, they looked like a real family. Just as a massive wave of sadness nearly swallowed me whole, I suddenly felt oddly calm. Like a lifeless shell, I followed them from a distance, watching the three of them pick Oswin up from school and take him out for dinner. I saw Oswin holding Beverly's hand, looking at her with a serious expression, yet speaking with an innocent, childish tone. "Aunt Beverly, I apologize on behalf of my mom. You're such a wonderful person, Oswin really likes you." Beverly squatted down in front of him and patted his small face. "Oh? And just how much do you like me? Do you like me more than your mom?" Oswin pressed his lips together, hesitating as he lowered his head. I felt as though I already knew what he was going to say. I quickly turned away and walked into a nearby women's clothing store, escaping the answer that would break me. Pathetically, I went back home and still had no courage to confront it, pretending as if nothing had happened. I deceived myself, thinking, it's okay, Oswin is just upset with me. Once I explain, he'll understand what he means to me. His place in my life is truly different from Andre's. He's loved me earnestly for 5 years, putting me first in everything. Whenever Andre would insult me, Oswin would immediately climb onto my lap, covering my ears with his small hands. Mommy doesn't have to listen. Mommy doesn't have to listen. After he turned 4, feeling that he'd grown up, he even started standing up to Andre whenever we argued. Though his strength was minuscule, it was the only source of love I had felt in these past 5 years. Yet, they came home with Beverly. Beverly had fainted from low blood sugar. Andre carried her back here. Oswin just glanced at me briefly before he ran anxiously after Andre. The nanny made a cup of sugar water, her hand shaky from a burn she'd gotten from the kettle. I took the cup from her and gently said, "There's burn ointment in the medicine cabinet. Go put some on, and I'll bring this up for you." She thanked me, saying, "You're so kind." But those closest to me didn't feel that way. When I entered the guest room with the sugar water, only Beverly was lying on the bed, still unconscious. I placed the cup on the bedside table. Then, the door opened behind me. "What are you doing?" I turned around and met Oswin's wary gaze. He brushed past me, knocking the cup of water aside. Then he walked to the bed and, with a light touch, lifted the blanket to cover Beverly's exposed arm. Standing with his back to me, he spoke in a cold voice I'd never heard before. "Aunt Beverly is a good person. Don't hurt her anymore. Mom, you need to apologize to Aunt Beverly. And stop being the bad person." Any thought I had of explaining myself just faded away. After that, Oswin and Beverly only grew closer. The 3 of them looked more and more like a family. During that period, I lived in a daze, slowly detaching myself from my attachment to him. Until now. I'm hanging over a cliff's edge, hearing Oswin say, "Dad, tell them to let Aunt Beverly down. After all." He glanced at me briefly, then went back to tugging on Andre's pants. "After all, Mom has the system. She won't get hurt or die anyway." I only felt an emptiness, not even sadness. The system, however, panicked. "No, no. Why would he give up on you? Aren't you his mom? Oh no, oh no. This means I have to unbind from you. When you fall, I won't be able to save you. What are we going to do?" Andre looked at me steadily. "Don't you have anything to say? Maybe, ask me to choose you?" I didn't respond, staring peacefully at the sea. It felt like I was finally getting free. Andre sneered, tugging his lips mockingly. "It's what you chose." Then he coldly ordered the kidnapper, "Let Beverly go." In the next instant, the rope tied to my wrist was cut. I fell straight into the sea. Without a single word for Andre or Oswin. And then, in my mind, I heard a familiar mechanical voice. The system's voice held no emotion, as detached as when it first told me I'd entered this world. "Host binding conditions not met. You are now abandoned in this virtual world." I plunged into the water, my body jarred by the impact. It felt like my bones were shattered. I struggled to untie the ropes, then tried to swim to the surface. On the nearest shore, Andre's men were scanning the water. But without hesitation, I swam toward the opposite shore. It was exhausting, especially with my injuries from the fall. When I finally reached land, I was so drained I couldn't stand. I'm not sure how long it took, but as the sun set, a harsh, cold wind struck my soaked body. The temperature plunged, and I shivered uncontrollably. At last, I staggered to my feet, dragging my heavy body. Step by step. Leaving behind this suffocating place. And I vowed, never to return. Just as Beverly was about to hit the ground, Andre caught her in his arms. Oswin quickly ran over to check on her. No one looked at the woman who had fallen into the water. It wasn't until Beverly was in the car, checked over by the family doctor and confirmed to be fine, that Oswin suddenly seemed to remember. Hesitantly, he tugged on Andre's sleeve. "Dad, where's Mom?" Andre didn't even turn around, reaching out to check Beverly's forehead. She'll be back soon. His indifferent tone held a trace of sarcasm. I arranged for someone to meet her at the shore. Oswin pursed his lips, feeling that too much time had passed. But Mom still hadn't come back. He stopped looking at Beverly and ran to the roadside, waiting for Cheryl. As night fell, Andre realized something was wrong. In a low voice, he called the guards and rescue team stationed on the shore. What's going on? Mr. Andre, we still haven't found Mrs. Cheryl. Andre's expression turned chaotic. Say that again. Yes, sir, don't worry, not finding a body is good news. We'll keep searching. Shut up. Andre snapped coldly. If I hear those 2 words again, you'll be jumping in to look for her yourself. Cheryl couldn't be dead. Andre thought these people were absurd. She had the system's protection, and just before, hanging on that cliff, she'd been so calm. No matter how many reasons he came up with to convince himself that Cheryl wouldn't die, his hands still shook uncontrollably. After half an hour, everyone returned from the shore. Without Cheryl. They stood before Andre, dripping wet and looking defeated. We're sorry, Mr. Andre. She was probably swept away by the tide. We couldn't find her body on any of the nearby beaches. Andre stood motionless, as though he hadn't heard them. Oswin, pale-faced, asked in a trembling voice. What does it mean to be swept away by the tide? It means Mom's never coming back. The person reporting changed his wording to be more gentle. In the next moment, Oswin fainted right in front of them. Oswin awoke in his own room. He remembered that he and Mom had decorated every part of this little room together. The nanny was sitting next to him, giving him water. Oswin, you're awake. She looked at him with sad, tear-stained eyes. Oswin didn't notice anything unusual. He immediately climbed out of bed and headed for his mom's bedroom. He wanted to tell her that he'd had a terrifying nightmare. He dreamed that his mom had fallen into the sea. It felt so real. Every time he had a nightmare, he'd grab his blanket and run to sleep with his mom. This time was no different. He ran to the bedroom door, his small, bare feet pattering against the floor, reaching up to turn the doorknob. Mom. The room was silent and dark. No one was there. Oswin stood dumbfounded in the doorway. The nanny came up behind him. Oswin didn't turn around, he just stared blankly into the room. Nanny Lee, where's Mom? The nanny couldn't hold back her tears and started sobbing. She's gone. Oswin continued to stand quietly. The shadows cast his figure long and thin. After a while, the hallway was empty. He finally murmured, Mom isn't dead. She just doesn't want me anymore. Late at night, I wandered aimlessly down the deserted street. I didn't know how long I walked. My body grew warmer, but I still felt unbearably cold. My mind grew foggy until I finally passed out completely. When I woke again, I was still lying there, my head throbbing. But a tattered blanket was draped over me. You're awake? I shivered in surprise, not noticing someone nearby. Following the sound, I looked over and saw a pair of bright eyes peeking from behind a half-open trash can lid. Did you cover me with the blanket? The little figure seemed to confirm that I wasn't a threat and nimbly jumped out of the trash can. She crouched in front of me, nodding twice vigorously. Yes. It was a dirty little girl, about the same age as Oswin. For a moment, I wondered how they'd react if they knew I was missing. But I forced myself to focus on the girl in front of me. Why were you in the trash can? Her eyes shone with hope as she seriously explained. I heard the auntie from the vegetable market telling her son that she found him in the trash. So I'm waiting here, for my mom to come pick me up. I froze, shocked anyone would still believe that. Her dust-covered face flushed a bit, and she shyly added. If no one comes for me today, I'll go somewhere else. There's no food here, and I'm so hungry. If I don't find anything, I'll have to eat that cake. She pointed at a moldy egg tart nearby. Maybe it was the fever clouding my mind. Inexplicably, I looked at her and asked. I'm here to pick you up. Will you come home with me? She hesitated, then placed her dirty little hand in mine. Do I have a mom now? Yes. Wow, Dora has a mom. I took Dora to my small apartment on the outskirts of town. I'd bought it a long time ago. Even Andre didn't know about it. It was 40 kilometers from his villa in the city. That night, a news notification popped up on my phone. I clicked on it reflexively. Obituary: CEO Andre's secret wife tragically dies in a boating accident. I laughed at the word secret. He'd once said he'd never marry someone like me. After officially adopting Dora, we lived there peacefully for 3 months. Then one day, while I was in the city updating her paperwork, I ran into Andre and Oswin. Both of their faces changed. I only paused for a moment, then calmly looked away and led Dora in the opposite direction. Dora tilted her head, gently tugging my hand. "Mom, why is that boy watching you and crying?" I didn't look back, my voice as neutral as if I were talking about a stranger. "I don't know. I don't know them." Suddenly, Oswin began to cry loudly. He didn't say a word, just stood there and sobbed. Andre, however, called after me in a hoarse voice. "Cheryl. Are you really going to leave him here, crying his heart out?" I paused. Then I heard Oswin stifle his cries immediately. His voice broke as he pleaded with Andre. "Dad, Oswin isn't crying, please take Oswin home, Oswin wants to go home." I figured Oswin didn't want to see me either. I quickened my pace as I left. The paperwork took some time to complete, so Dora and I stayed in the small apartment. One afternoon, after I'd finally gotten her to sleep, a call came from an unknown number. I stepped out to the balcony to answer. "It's me." It was Andre. I wasn't surprised he'd tracked down my new number so quickly. "Was faking your death amusing, Cheryl? Watching everyone panic, feeling sad and crying for you, does that make you proud?" His voice turned cold. "Aren't you planning on coming home?" I gazed into the distance and softly asked. "How do you know I was faking? What if I almost died?" He laughed. "How could you die? Doesn't that thing always protect you? The system and I are unbound. It's gone for good. Because no one in this world chooses me. So it didn't choose me either." I told him how I almost died in the sea, and then again on the roadside. So why would I ever come back? After a long pause, Andre spoke in a low voice. "Cheryl, you must come back. Oswin is sick." I replied flatly, "You can hire the best doctors for him. He's depressed." Today, Oswin was diagnosed with severe depression. I rushed to Andre's house, and as I opened the door, I heard Oswin's voice. "More dessert, please." He sounded cheerful. I stood at the entrance and gave a cold smirk. So much for depression, just an excuse to get me back. I was about to turn and leave when I heard them speak again. "Oswin, you haven't eaten much lately. Eating so much all at once is hard on your stomach." "It's okay, Nanny. I need to eat a lot so I won't be sick anymore, then maybe Dad will let me sneak a look at Mom." The nanny sighed. "I also heard Miss Cheryl was alive. Why would you have to sneak around to see her?" Nearly half a minute of silence passed. Oswin's voice softened, void of emotion, as if stating a fact. "Mom won't come back. She doesn't want me and Dad anymore. She'd be unhappy to see me. I don't want Mom to be unhappy, so I'll just sneak a peek from a distance." I stood there, my eyes stinging with emotion. Once I composed myself, I pushed open the door and walked in. "Miss Cheryl. You're back?" Oswin immediately looked up from the table, his eyes widening in disbelief. We hadn't seen each other for 3 months, and even I felt a bit awkward. He jumped down from his chair and approached me. "Mom." He looked up, his chapped lips moving but not saying anything. Just then, Andre came down from his study upstairs, giving me a quick once-over. "You came like this?" I looked him in the eye. "What's wrong with that? Where's your luggage?" I never said I was moving back into Andre's house. Oswin's expression shifted from joy to helplessness. Seeing me glance his way, he immediately lowered his head, hiding the tears welling in his eyes. Andre stared at me intently. I didn't back down. After a minute of tense silence, Andre let out a deep breath, as if calming himself. "Come upstairs. We need to talk." In Andre's study. He leaned back against his desk. "Today's the first time this month that Oswin finished a whole bowl of food," he said, looking down at me with dark eyes. "Are you staying away because you want to watch him die?" I thought for a moment. I could take him to stay with me for a while to help him. For a while? Andre looked at me. What do you mean? I mean, once he's better, I'll bring him back. He smirked slightly, about to say something when I interrupted him. What? About to call me heartless? Aren't you the ones who abandoned me, who left me to die? Andre's expression darkened, and he pressed his lips together, staring at me. After a day of highs and lows, I was exhausted, too tired to argue anymore. I took his silence as acceptance of my decision, grabbed my bag, and turned to leave. We didn't, Andre said. Oswin and I. We both just thought you wouldn't die. I smiled. Yes, because I won't die, I'm expected to risk my life over and over. Andre stayed silent. I went downstairs from the study and saw Oswin sitting upright on the couch, a tear just barely hanging from his lashes. Mom. He looked up at me with an eager smile. I never really knew how to face him, so I tried to keep things calm. Oswin, do you want to come stay with Mom for a while? He clenched his little fists on his lap, then nervously let go. Can I? I nodded. He hesitated, reaching out for my hand but then pulling back. Oswin would like that. After the nanny packed his bags, I took him with me. There were 2 small single beds in the guest room of my place, just enough for 2 little ones to get along peacefully. I tucked them in, turned off the light, and was about to leave when Dora called out to me. Mom, can Dora sleep with you? Dora's afraid of the dark. For the past 3 months, Dora had been sleeping with me. Without thinking much, I went over, picked her up, and carried her out. Of course, Mommy will hold Dora. Oswin was too quiet. I only noticed when I was about to turn off the light, he was lying obediently under the blanket, blinking at me and Dora. I suddenly remembered that he was also a little afraid of the dark. I hesitated and asked softly, Oswin, are you still afraid of the dark? He gave a small smile, clutching his teddy bear tighter. Oswin has the teddy bear Mom got him, so I'm not scared. I didn't press further, turned off the light, and left with Dora. Later, I took out a new storybook I'd bought that day and read softly to Dora, patting her back until she drifted off to sleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up feeling thirsty and went to the kitchen for water. When I opened the door, I was startled. Oswin was curled up in his blanket, fast asleep at my bedroom door. I quickly scooped him up and carried him back to the guest room. He stirred, half opening his eyes before wrapping his arms around my neck, still half asleep. He nuzzled into my neck and mumbled with a soft smile, so nice. In my dream, Mom belongs only to me. I silently placed him back in bed, touched his forehead and stomach to check his temperature, and then looked down at his face, a face that reminded me so much of Andre. I could never forget the things he said on the cliff's edge. But somehow, Oswin always found a way to touch my softest spot. I could be cold toward Andre, but it was always hard to steel my heart against Oswin. I'd been meaning to have an open talk with Oswin about his depression. But Andre said the doctor advised against mentioning it directly, as it could upset him. I wasn't sure how to approach this new Oswin. He was so different, so overly obedient that he reminded me of an abandoned cat. In those first few days, he would do everything he could to please me, even things he wasn't supposed to do. If he accidentally dropped some crumbs while snacking on the couch or carpet, he'd pick each piece up with his little fingers, and the next time, he'd eat even more carefully, holding his other hand under his mouth to catch any crumbs. No matter how much I reassured him that it was okay, he wouldn't listen. This sight of Oswin made me feel uneasy. He even brought a basin to wash Dora's feet one day, his little body wobbling as he carried it over. Dora, come here. Big brother will wash your feet. Dora looked disapproving, snatched the basin, and threw it on the floor. Why are you doing everything, Oswin? I can take care of myself. Oswin just smiled shyly, didn't argue, and kept helping whenever he could. Finally, one day, he insisted on washing his own bowl, but accidentally dropped and broke it. I went into the kitchen. Oswin, don't touch it. Let Mom clean up. Oswin immediately squatted down to pick up the broken pieces. Mom, don't come over, you might cut yourself. I'll clean it up. Afraid he'd get hurt, I reached for the glass shards first, and my fingertip was accidentally cut. SSS. Bright red blood started to flow. Oswin was flustered, apologizing immediately. Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. After that, he stopped trying to do things on his own, but he became even more cautious. He started passively going along with whatever I asked him to do. If Dora wanted to play a game that required two people, he'd never refuse. Both kids had similar tastes, and whenever there was something they both liked to eat, Oswin would always let Dora have the last piece. He stopped acting spoiled around me and no longer asked for anything. The only time he did was when he casually mentioned he'd left his sketchbook at Andre's house. When I went to pick it up that evening, I ran into Andre and Beverly just as they were getting out of the car. Beverly was drunk, leaning on Andre and, with a blurry gaze, pointed at me. "Hey! What are you doing at my house?" I wasn't surprised at all. I calmly explained, "I'm here to pick up Oswin's sketchbook. I'll leave right after." Andre pulled Beverly away from him, looking unusually tense for someone usually so indifferent. "Cheryl, you've got the wrong idea. Beverly's just..." I looked past him and interrupted without any concern, "It has nothing to do with me." But before I'd gone a few steps, Andre caught up and grabbed my wrist. "What do you mean, nothing to do with you?" I looked at him with confusion and asked, "What does it have to do with me? Aren't you the one who said yourself that your engagement to Beverly was none of my business?" Andre's brows furrowed with irritation. "I'm not engaged to Beverly, and there's nothing going on between us." He looked at me steadily. "I've only ever had you." I turned my gaze away, already losing patience. "I don't want to hear it. You have to listen." Andre wrapped an arm around my waist, pulling me close. "Cheryl, let's get married." His voice was rough with emotion. "I've realized I can't live without you." "But I can live without you," I said with a hollow laugh, looking at him as if he were absurd. "I don't love you anymore. Why would I marry you?" As he stood there stunned, I finally pushed his hand away. Andre's lips moved. "What do you mean, you don't love me anymore?" I chuckled. "So you still think that during the 5 years you were ignoring me and making headlines with Beverly, I kept loving you? The only reason I stayed was that I couldn't leave Oswin. But now, thankfully, he's no longer in my future plans either." I smiled in relief. I can finally break free from the Andre family. "Is that really how you feel?" Andre looked down, pulling his lips into a bitter smile. "Well, that's not how I feel. Cheryl, I've always thought of you as my wife." I acted as if I hadn't heard and walked away in silence. So, being Andre's wife would mean a lifetime of misery. I hope there isn't a next victim. Oswin was slowly becoming more comfortable around us, no longer as tense as he had been before. Just when I thought everything was heading in a positive direction, and Dora and I could almost leave, Oswin and Dora's relationship broke down. That day, I was in the kitchen slicing fruit while the two of them played a game in the living room. Occasionally, I heard bursts of laughter from them, but mostly it was Dora's giggles echoing through the room. I had to really pay attention to catch Oswin's quieter responses. Then, suddenly, it fell silent outside. A few seconds later, Dora's loud shout pierced the silence. Sensing something was wrong, I rushed out. Dora was pushing Oswin forcefully, shoving him down onto the floor. "Bad person," she shouted angrily. "You're not allowed to go near my mom anymore." "She's not your mom." "She's Dora's mom, only Dora's." Oswin sat on the floor, head down in silence. I moved toward him to help him up, but Dora grabbed my hand tightly. "Mom, don't go near him. He's a bad kid, he'll hurt you." Seeing my hesitation, Oswin quickly got to his feet by himself, nervously gripping his pant seam, still avoiding eye contact. I crouched down to comfort Dora instead. "What's wrong, Dora?" Her eyes were red with anger, on the verge of tears, as she glared at Oswin. "Oswin just said it was his fault you fell into the ocean." She tried to hit him again, but I held her in my arms to stop her. Dora lashed out, her small fists swinging. "Mommy brought me home and got really sick. The doctor said she almost died," she said, referring to those few days I had a high fever. That time had truly scared Dora. She thought she'd given me some disease from being in the trash for so long. I'd explained that it was from falling into the ocean to ease her guilt. Tears welled up in Dora's eyes as she stared at Oswin, filled with resentment. "You almost killed Mom. Dora's going to call the police and have you arrested." After a long time comforting Dora, I managed to calm her down and took her to her room. Meanwhile, Oswin stood quietly to the side the whole time. I walked over to him and gently patted his head. Don't be sad, Oswin. I'm sorry on Dora's behalf. Did you get hurt? Let mommy take a look. Finally, Oswin looked up. He had bitten his lip so hard, trying not to cry, that it was bleeding. His voice was choked with emotion as he looked at me. Mom. Oswin was wrong. Oswin knows he was wrong. The next moment, he burst into tears. I'm sorry, Mom. Andre once told me that Oswin had become very closed off, never crying even once after I left. The first time he cried aloud was when he saw me on the street that day. This was the second time. I didn't want to hurt you, Mom. I've always loved you most. He sobbed painfully. Even if you didn't want Oswin before, Oswin has always loved you. I crouched down and wiped his tears, feeling sad myself. If only he had told me this before I fell into the ocean. During that time, I kept trying to explain things to Oswin and clarify the misunderstanding. But whenever I opened his door, I was met with the same cold expression Andre wore. Mom, please knock and wait for me to answer before you enter my room next time, okay? Embarrassed, I apologized, forcing a smile. I wanted to talk to you about that day. Sorry, Mom, I don't want to listen. Why? I quickly moved a step closer to him. Oswin stepped back, widening the distance again. Because you're a bad person. You did bad things. He furrowed his brow, his gaze icy, resembling Andre's expression perfectly. Don't make excuses, he said. I was left heartbroken, driven out of his room. Andre was casually leaning against the doorway, watching me with a faint, mocking smile. What is this, Cheryl? He asked. The payback for coming back into my life with a hidden agenda? I became more withdrawn by the day. Whenever I tried to repair my relationship with Oswin, he would shut me out. Sometimes, I'd even overhear him laughing and chatting with Andre. Dad, Aunt Beverly can't eat spicy food, so remember that. Next time, let's take her somewhere else. Dad, did you see? Aunt Beverly looked so happy today. When she's happy, Oswin's happy too. But as soon as I appeared, Oswin's smile would vanish. He'd lower his head, mumble Mom, and then run back to his room. Standing in the living room, I could clearly hear the sound of his door locking. That day, Oswin cried himself to sleep. I was still worrying about how he would get along with Dora in the future. The next day, when he woke up, he smiled at me as obediently as ever, as if yesterday's outburst had never happened. Mom, could you call Dad for me? I sat by his bed, helping him adjust his freshly changed clothes. Why? I want to go home. He smiled, his eyes curving with happiness. I miss Dad. Could you ask him to pick me up? Not suspecting anything, I called Andre. Although Oswin and Andre had always been somewhat distant, they had been getting along well with Beverly lately, so it seemed normal for them to grow closer. Besides, I was planning to take Dora back to the countryside soon, too. That evening, Andre came to pick up Oswin. Just before they left, Oswin hesitated and tugged on my sleeve. Mom, could you hold Oswin? He held his arms up, reaching for me. I paused, but eventually hugged him tightly. I didn't know what to say to him. My feelings toward Oswin were complicated. I was still happy for him, hurt for him, wishing him health and safety, but I didn't want to live with him anymore. We both knew we couldn't move past what had happened. Whenever we were together, I had to pretend to be unaffected, and he had to hide his guilt and regret. Oswin clung to me softly. Mom, I'm sorry. I thought about his depression, gently patting his back and, for once, told him a small lie. I don't blame you, Oswin. Get well soon, okay? He nodded firmly, beaming. I will. I won't make Dad and Mom worry anymore. After Oswin got into the car, Andre slowly approached me. Are you really leaving? He asked. I nodded. Cheryl, if I'd chosen you that day, would things be different now? His deep eyes held a mixture of emotions. In a soft voice, he said, I keep dreaming of that day, dreaming I saved you, and I explained everything about Beverly. In my dreams, you give me another chance. I glanced at my watch, wondering if Dora had finished watching her cartoon and was waiting for me to tell her a bedtime story. I was worried she'd feel scared being home alone this late. So, I firmly turned down his attempt. But in reality, I wouldn't. Do you have anything else to say? If not, I'm going back. As I grew impatient, barely holding back my politeness, Andre lowered his gaze and shook his head. Goodbye. I turned and walked away without hesitation. Only when I opened the door to see Dora did I finally feel a bit of relief. She puffed her cheeks. Mom, where's Oswin? She exclaimed. I need to teach him a lesson so he'll never dare to hurt you again. I chuckled and pinched her cheek. He's gone now. We won't see him again, so he can't hurt me anymore. You're so strong, Dora, taking care of Mom, I said. She looked at me seriously. I'll always protect Mom. I thought it was just a child's promise, until 2 weeks later. When I went to pick Dora up from kindergarten, a little boy cheekily tried to lift my skirt. Dora clenched her fist and punched him right in his right eye, leaving a big bruise. She didn't hold back. Dora glared at him, warning, do that again, and I'll pop your eyeballs out. The boy was twice Dora's size. She bruised her own hand, but she made him hurt too. Back home, I gently applied ointment to her hand. Dora, please don't do that again. You ended up hurting yourself too. She shook her head, her little face looking serious. It's not that, Mom. He won't dare lift your skirt again. Because Dora taught him a lesson. If you only scold him, he'll just do it again next time. Dora's hand might hurt for a few days, but if it means a bad person will never bully you again, it's totally worth it. I bent down to hug her. Mom is really lucky to have Dora in her life. Dora hurriedly responded. Actually, Dora is luckier, because Mom found her. I didn't argue further. But I knew it was equally true. We had both appeared in each other's lives when we were at our lowest, like the first rays of light breaking through each other's endless night. Neither of us would be trapped in that eternal winter anymore. Oswin's epilogue. Aunt Beverly crouched down in front of me, smiling as she asked. How much do you like me? More than you like your mom? I lowered my head, looking down at the tips of my shoes, trying to find a way to answer that wouldn't hurt Aunt Beverly's feelings. But I guess I wasn't smart enough, I couldn't come up with anything. I avoided looking her in the eyes, feeling guilty. Well, Oswin still likes Mom the most. Aunt Beverly chuckled, why's that? Your mom used to bully me all the time. Because Mom is the person who loves Oswin the most in the whole world, so Oswin loves her the most too. I gave her a serious little bow, saying, Aunt Beverly, I'm sorry. My mom will definitely change, please forgive her. Aunt Beverly straightened up, stretching before responding. We'll see, depending on my mood. If I feel like it, maybe I won't hold it against her. I took mental notes, if I made Aunt Beverly happy, she might forgive my mom. So I started pestering Dad, asking him to take me to visit Aunt Beverly. I brought her a Christmas tree I made in class, spent my New Year money on snacks I thought she'd like, and asked Dad to take us to the amusement park with her. Every day, I looked at her expectantly, asking, Aunt Beverly, are you happy today? She'd be eating ice cream and casually nod. Yes, I'm happy. At that, I'd give her the biggest smile. If Auntie is happy, Oswin is happy too. She looked at me oddly and said, Of course I'm happy, I get to be with your dad. I froze. But Dad is. Mom's. After that, she kept saying she was happy but stopped mentioning forgiving Mom. Until that one time when she and Mom both got caught in a trap. I figured Mom would be fine, so I helped Aunt Beverly, thinking she'd be grateful to me and Dad and would finally let go of her grudge against Mom. But Mom was heartbroken. She was upset that I didn't choose her, and then she didn't want to come back from the sea. I always believed that Mom wasn't really gone, so I held back my tears. But later, when I finally saw her again, I couldn't stop myself from feeling sad. I started crying but didn't dare run over to hug her. She just glanced briefly at me and Dad, like she was looking at strangers. I knew then that she didn't want me anymore. I cherished the time I'd spent with her, even though I felt like I was borrowing Dora's mom. So I helped around the house and avoided causing her any trouble, hoping that if I was good enough, both Mom and Dora would accept me. That way, I could stay with Mom. I wanted her to tell me stories and put me to sleep. But Dora wanted that too. I couldn't compete with her. So I didn't mind, I'd just quietly sleep by their door, that way I could still hear Mom telling stories. Inside, I could hear Mom's gentle voice. Dora, it's time to sleep. Be a good girl and go to sleep. I hugged the teddy bear Mom gave me, curled up in my blanket on the floor, and pretended I heard her saying, Oswin, it's time to sleep. Listening to Mom tell stories like that made it easier to dream about her. In my dreams, Mom was holding me, holding only me. She was Oswin's mom alone. But then Dora found out it was my fault. Mom fell into the sea. She started hating me. And I couldn't stay with Mom anymore. I didn't want her to feel torn because of me, so I decided to leave. And later, when Dad wanted to go look for Mom, I stopped him. What's wrong? Don't you want your mom to come back? He asked. I shook my head. No, I don't. She doesn't like us, and she wouldn't be happy if she came back. Dad, if you love someone, shouldn't you want them to be happy? Dad didn't say anything else. But he didn't give up on Mom. After that, he often went to the seaside alone, the same sea where Mom had fallen. When I was 7, Dad rescued someone who was drowning at the beach. He almost got swept away himself. When the doctor came out of the emergency room, he didn't look relieved. He told Grandma. Although he survived, he has a large infection in his lungs, and there's irreversible damage. His lungs will be extremely fragile from now on. I didn't fully understand what the doctor said. But every time Dad got sick and went to the hospital, I knew it was serious. Sometimes, he even coughed up blood. His health wasn't what it used to be. One day, after coughing up blood, he lay on the bed, looking exhausted, his eyes red as he asked me to call Mom, hoping she'd come to see him. I held the phone but silently refused. Both Dad and I were in the wrong. We didn't deserve forgiveness or sympathy, and we had no right to disturb her life. The end.